just to demonstrate, to practice what I'm preaching, I'm making a digital video tape of my presentation, and I'm going to put it on the web, and the stragglers or you or anybody else will be able to see it. So, thanks very much for inviting me. These are three subjects: internet voting, the Valley, and the future, that I'm interested in separately, and having an opportunity to speak about them all together was something I couldn't pass up, so I'm here. What I want to do is open the presentation with a sentence that involves the future, the Valley, and internet voting, and then talk about each one of them separately for about 5 minutes, and then talk a little bit about their interrelationship, and then I'd really like to have as much of a discussion kind of thing as we can do after that about those subjects. Here's a sentence. In the near future, when the Valley votes on secession from the city of Los Angeles, it will vote over the internet. What makes me say that? Well, I've been working, as Ellen mentioned, for 4 years to make internet voting a reality, and not much happened for the first 3 years, but a lot has been happening in the last year. When I wrote the Virtual Voting Rights Initiative in 1996, the most frequent reaction to it was, what? In 1999, when I wrote the California Internet Voting Initiative, the most frequent reaction was, well, it's obvious that we're going to have internet voting, it's just a matter of when. So I think that the fact that it went from totally unknown to inevitable in 3 years is a testament to the fact that not only is internet time very compressed, but so is political internet time. Here's what the Virtual Voting Rights Initiative that I wrote in 1996 called for. It said, voter registration, voting, and petition signing could all be conducted over the internet using digital certificates and digital signatures. It also called for the creation of government-subsidized websites for candidates for office and for proponents and opponents of initiative measures, or referendum measures. Since then, the free market and the desires of candidates and consultants has taken care of the website issue. There is barely a candidate left who doesn't have a website where they collect money and solicit volunteers and get out their positions and announce events and so on. So there's no need for any more government action to take care of that, I don't think. Lately, though, I've been talking informally with young staffers in Republican in Pennsylvania, Democrat in Sacramento, who have drafted for their representatives, their bosses, bills to do a less extensive version of internet voting than I proposed in 1996, but still a real step forward in those directions. In Pennsylvania, the suggestion, the bill, would provide for voting at the polling place within Pennsylvania. And thanks to Ellen's urging, I brought a copy of it. And as with all the other things I've got here with me, I'll give you my email, and if you send me your email, I'll be happy to send you copies of all of any or all of the bills or other documents that I mentioned here today. So the bill in Pennsylvania that's now pending in the Pennsylvania legislature would allow people in an experimental capacity to vote from polling places, not from home, not from office, but from polling places. The bill in California, which is sponsored now by Assembly Member Kevin Shelley of San Francisco, it's called AB 2519. It calls for the establishment of 3 counties as experimental test beds for remote internet voting, and those counties would volunteer to participate in the experiment, and the author of the bill expresses his hope that one would be in the south, one would be in the north, and one would be in the Central Valley to test that out all over the state. So those 2 bills are pending in state legislatures right now. Also, the government of Belgium is considering a bill to provide internet voting for Belgian citizens, subjects, I guess, there. And it cites, and I've got it here and you can see it if you ask for it, almost exactly the same reasons that I cited when I got started with this, namely it saves money, it increases participation, it makes it possible for people who are out of the country or out of the state to vote in a timely way in elections and so on. So the logic behind internet voting is pretty much international, and more jurisdictions, states, and countries are now coming to realize that that's the case. In terms of specific experience with internet voting, 35,000 people in Arizona, Democrats all, voted in March to choose between Bill Bradley and Al Gore to see who would be who they preferred for the presidential nomination. There were some problems with it. People who had browsers below 3.0, I think it was, had trouble. People who had Macintosh had trouble, but still 35,000 people did vote, and as far as I know, there were no complaints about fraud. There was a lot of hullabaloo beforehand about the digital divide and whether the minorities and the poor people in Arizona would be able to vote. And the people running it went out of their way to make sure that those people were involved one way or another in the election, and it doesn't seem to be as big an issue after the election as it was before. So, although, as I'm going to say later, that remains an important issue related to Internet voting. Right now, my effort on the initiative front is for something called the California Identification and Petitioning Initiative, which I'm hoping to put on the ballot in either March or November of 2001. This measure, or the CIPI, would create a California State Issuing Authority, which would provide everyone in the state with a digital certificate, which would be stored in a smart card, which would form the substrate of their driver's license or their state identification card. They'd also be able to get copies of it sent to their home computer, their office computer, their mobile computer, wherever they happen to do that. This would mean that each citizen in California would have the means to legally establish their intent and desire and functionality in signing something. And if you look at the voting process and what stands in the way of Internet voting, you see that to register to vote you have to sign something and submit the form. To vote, you have to show up at the polls and sign something. To sign a petition, you have to sign the petition. All of these depend on the putting of your legal entityhood onto a piece of paper and saying, this is me, this is what I intend to do. In order to have Internet voting, remote voting, you need to be able to establish that identity, authentication, and desire to enter into a contract or testify to something remotely. And when I got started in 1996 and looked around the Internet and other places to find out what means might exist to establish your signingness at a distance, digital certificates were touted as a logical and a good solution, but one that wasn't popular or understood or widely dispersed and so on. It still isn't widely. They still aren't widely understood, dispersed, or used. It's my belief that by attaching them to efforts to get Internet voting or Internet petition signing, that barrier, which is a psychological or a political one, not a technical one, can be overcome. And people will be able to get them, they'll be able to understand them, they'll be able to use them, and once they can, they will be able to use them to sign initiative petitions. But not just initiative petitions, they'll also be able to use them for e-commerce of all types, and that, in its turn, will enable bankers and retailers and schools and hospitals and all the institutions around to do more and better e-commerce in a better and a cheaper and a more efficient and a more secure way. So, as of now, more or less, my interest in Internet voting and Internet petition signing is as not exactly a stalking horse, but as a means to speed up the process by which everyone will have digital certificates and digital signatures will become more widely used, because I think that will help the business climate and people's ability to access their medical records or their kids' school records or any number of other steps that can't really be done securely on the Internet now. But, of course, you'll also be able to sign initiative petitions, and this will have a number of political effects as well. For example, instead of needing to raise $1 million to pay a professional signature gathering team to collect in the case of a statutory initiative, 419,260 signatures, in the case of a constitutional amendment, even more, you won't have to do that. You'll write it, you'll put it on the web. Of course, there'll be disparities in how easy it'll be for people to get word of its existence out to people, but good ones ought to be able to attract attention, and then they can be signed easily, cheaply, well-informedly, at a low opportunity cost for people who go to the website, read the initiative, read pro material, find negative material, make a decision, digitally sign it, and the process is over. This will help people who are rushing in and out of supermarkets from being accosted by people who don't really understand what they're talking about, but are always saying sign this, and giving them things that telling them things that might not be completely complete in terms of the accuracy of what they're saying. Not that material on the web is guaranteed to be any more so, but you'll have more leisure, you'll be able to look at it and consider it and so on. Another advantage of doing this is that when the petitions are submitted and considered by the registrars of voters, as it now, the current rule is that a certain number of them are selected randomly, and those are checked. It's usually, I think, less than 5%, and extrapolations are made according to complex formulas of location and all kinds of things that I don't think they tell us. But every one isn't checked. It's only a random sample. And as the Valley secession petition proved, this can be complicated and time-consuming and annoying when people think they have the right number of signatures, but because of some flukes in the process, they're not. The petitions aren't certified. With digital signing of initiative petitions, the computer will very fast check directly each signature and say this digital signature is valid. Therefore, that signing of the petition is okay. Increment it by 1, 2, 3, and so on. So every signature will be checked, which seems to me a more secure, as well as a cheaper, more effective, more honest way of finding out who signed a petition instead of getting the ink, checking 5% of them, making extrapolations, and so on. So that's another advantage. And if you want to check them over again, take another 2 hours and check them all over again, which, again, is cheaper, faster, more accurate. I imagine that voting over the Internet may be an early candidate for this method of qualifying an initiative for the ballot. I have a paragraph or two here explaining why Internet voting is a good idea, but Alan said you were already converts, so I wasn't going to push it too hard. I just wanted to mention that I think that one of the main reasons that motivated me in the beginning was to make sure that, or to at least encourage more people to vote more of the time. As a proof of why that's really necessary, last year, in 1999, the city of Los Angeles voted on a new charter. And if I've got my statistics right, 13% of the city's registered voters voted in that election. And since registered voters are a subset of eligible voters, and eligible voters are a subset of all the citizens out there, it seems then that a municipal constitution for the second largest city in the country was approved on the say-so of about 3% of the people who lived in it. This doesn't sound very democratic with a small d to me. Internet voting can't solve all of our problems, and it can't even solve all of our political problems, but it can make it easier to vote, and I think one of the problems that we have is that not enough people vote, and this I think would do something to solve that problem. And also, another feature of Valley life, I mean life everywhere, but especially in the Valley, is that people are busy. People are in two working parent families, people are in single parent families, people are single people with multiple jobs. The freeway is jammed up an awful lot of the time. The need to travel around is constant, and people don't have the time to say, okay, I'm going to go wait in another line. I'm going to go drive to another place. And with Internet voting, they can vote from their home, they can vote from their office, and as I'm going to fantasize about a little later, they'll be able to vote from almost any place. And I think that's another good reason for pushing for Internet voting. Also, the point I just made about signing initiative petitions through digital signatures rather than a pen and ink. Real voting, regular voting, voting in a polling place now, involves a person walking in, identifying themselves as who they claim to be, stating their address, and being asked to sign their name on in a register. As far as I understand, I'm open to correction from lawyers or others, it's illegal in California for the poll workers to ask for identification of the voters. So if you know for sure that someone's going to be out of town and you know where their polling place is, you can walk in and sign their name. I mean, it's illegal, it's fraud, you could go to jail, but it's not too hard to do. When people's identity are being checked, the same way I mentioned for initiative petitions, for the voting, with a digital certificate, which we'll explain a little bit more about how secure it is, the process is more secure. So one of the main criticisms leveled against Internet voting is it's not secure. People will commit fraud. Well, compared to what? It seems to me that a system of digital certificates properly implemented is going to provide more security, not less, in the voting process. And I'm willing to entertain counter-arguments, but that's what it seems to be the case. Okay, how does this affect the Valley? Right now, we're in, as I understand it, the secession lull, kind of a SEC, the equivalent of a quiet period before the IPO here, where LAFCO is thinking about, studying, researching, writing about what the terms of separation might be. However, eventually there's going to be a vote. And it seems to me that given the relative speed with which technology and politics evolve, by the time the vote comes, the technology will be more than ready to allow the vote to be conducted securely, cost-effectively, and easily over the Internet. And since, so, if we assume that the vote on secession takes place in 2004, what could we expect to have by way of voting? I just spent a few minutes figuring out what it's likely to be like. And I'm leaving out a lot of stuff. But you should keep in mind that a certain company named Microsoft that's been in trouble for various practices in the straightforward software area is now about to launch something called the Xbox to challenge the PlayStation 2. It already has web TV to deal with the television space, and it's introduced something called Pocket PC to provide a counter to the Palm Pilot platform and to take over the handheld computing. So these are products that are sort of almost there or about there already, and it seems to me that in another 4 years, well, you've probably used your imaginations too to see what kind of mobility and power and with digital certificates or their follow-on security will be possible in computer systems. And all I'm really saying is that we ought to take that same power that's going to be used in all the other systems and put it into the political sphere. Continuing advances in wireless technology will mean that cars, laptops, cell/smartphones, PDAs, and most household appliances will be connected to the web all the time, and that they will be able to be operated with voice commands. The digital certificate and digital signature functionality will be incorporated into these modules, or into one's personal server, which will amount to the same thing, or into both or all of them. The modules may incorporate additional biometric features such as fingerprint scanning or voice recognition and speech recognition, and may require the use of passwords or PINs. So in order to vote, you would approach or activate your cell smartphone or your car dashboard or your front refrigerator panel and authenticate yourself with whatever combination has been decided of fingerprints, voice, password, PIN, smart card. Saying secession ballot would call up your ballot. Saying pro would take you to the Valley Vote website where you could see and hear Jeff Brain and Richard Close making the case for secession. Saying no would deliver you to former Mayor Reardon's website where he explains why remaining part of Los Angeles is the better choice. After carefully considering both sides of the issue, you could say, vote now. This would call up the virtual ballot on your screen. You could type yes or no, or you could say yes or no. The screen, and I don't know whether this either sounds retro or Jetsons or the facts, but I mean, this is really where, or both. I mean, this is sort of where it seems to be going. Or Futurama. The screen would display your vote and ask you to confirm it. You'll say confirm, or maybe repeat your PIN number. Thank you for voting, the machine will say. Would you like a receipt? As soon as the virtual polls close, the system will tabulate the votes, alert the media, and send email to everyone who's asked to be notified. That's how I imagine the vote for Valley secession could go. There is, of course, the issue of the digital divide. Will everyone have voice-activated flat panel displays built into their frost-free refrigerators by 2004? And if they don't, what can we do? The issue of the digital divide is either going to be a soluble one or not, or it may be that it's just going to kind of drag on. Obviously, people who have more disposable income than others will be able to have more electronic toys, including the ones I'm talking about here. People without them will necessarily have to go to the polls and vote there, or ask for a mail ballot and use that. In Oregon, there are only mail ballots now. There are powerful forces, nevertheless, working to spread digital technology to everyone, which can be divided into two types, the public sector and the private sector. In the private sector, free computers with forced ad viewing, free computers with forced internet subscriptions, computers for sale with free net access, and other combinations are being used as the free market system, working on the profit motive, attempts to sign up the previously computationally excluded. These approaches may or may not work. After all, how valuable to advertisers are people who can't afford a PC without a subsidy for watching it? Then there's the public sector. The federal government has been working overtime to bridge the digital divide. Perhaps their efforts, or their efforts combined with private sector efforts, will do the job. In any case, there will still be early adopters. There will still be individuals and families who have the newest and most powerful digital tools, and others who don't. I believe the only way we can deal fairly with this issue is to make sure that every person continues to have access to the levers of democratic participation, be they manual, postal, or electronic, while working to raise the floor without lowering the ceiling, or even having a ceiling when it comes to using modern technology for self-government. And I think we might want to talk about this in particular more and how that can be done. Once the Valley votes, and if it votes to secede, I'd like to suggest further that we should then use the same tools that we've used to gain our municipal independence in order to grow and nurture the people and institutions that will constitute our greatest resource once we have done so and move into the future. By establishing an independent Valley city, as the focal point for the development and application of digital systems for education, transportation planning, energy conservation, recreation, and entertainment, as well as self-government, we would be empowering ourselves to evolve in the best possible ways while generating innovative new products and services that we could offer to other jurisdictions and markets for their use and our profit and prestige. And if we can get enough people to work at home and telecommute over the internet, maybe, just maybe, we can make a very small dent in the number of cars on the Valley's streets, which I think we could all agree would add significantly to our quality of life. In this way, the paradigm of internet voting, mobile, secure, easy-to-use network power, would benefit us enormously and let us do well in our business dealings with everyone else. Such an approach would build on the Valley's reputation and expertise in these areas while synergizing these assets with the best of emerging new technologies. This would provide historical continuity and a promising path into the future. As we move into the future, we want to make sure everyone comes along. Here in the Valley, that especially means the 1 million recent immigrants who, as workers, students, business and homeowners, and now voters, are fundamentally transforming the physical, economic, and cultural landscape of the Valley. These recent immigrants, who are here because they wanted a better life, will soon become the dominant players in the Valley's future. If we use all our best technology, our most creative ideas, a lot of energy, and the necessary money, these immigrants and their children will become the best educated generation in their history and in ours. If we do that, people in the future, including ourselves, will applaud what we did because it will pay off in so many ways. Creatively using the internet for voting and for education and for work will enable us to build a future for the Valley that will be even more agreeable than our own current situation than our current conditions are in comparison to those of a half-century ago. The future I've sketched out here, revolving as it does around internet voting and the next few years, is necessarily less expansive than it could be. Let me wrap up by taking a slightly broader view. When the Valley was full of orange groves, it might have been difficult to imagine today's Ventura Boulevard at rush hour. Today, our view into the future may be a little too murky for us to look ahead even 20 or 30 years and imagine what our place, what this place and our lives in it will look like. But one thing is certain. How it will look then will be determined, at least in part, by the decisions we make now. And if we believe that an honest, vibrant, participatory democracy is essential for us to make the best possible decisions about our future, then we certainly need to provide ourselves with the best possible tools available to help us build that system and make those decisions. To me, that means using internet voting to make the political decisions, and it means using the internet, other high technology, and every possible source of wisdom we can find anywhere to inform and guide us as individuals, families, and organizations as we wrestle with making the personal and collective decisions that will shape the future, that will create our future here in the Valley and everywhere else. Thanks.
Bill Jones. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this guy.
Oh, I've tried to have personal discussions with him.
He's probably one of the first names anyone brings up when you raise this issue.
Yes.
He's on record basically saying, the last time I heard him was, he was saying that it's important that people have confidence in the system and in its security. And he points to two things. First of all, in the anonymity of the system, because if we are verifying digital signatures and we know who the person is when they vote, we can also know who they voted for very easily. And at the same time, he points out that before the March primary was when you started to have the denial of service attacks on Yahoo and eBay, etc. And he brings up the specter that if we had internet voting, that we would be a likely target for such malicious attacks in the state of California. How real do you think that threat is, and how would you counter his arguments?
I'm not enough of a programmer to solve those problems, especially distributed denial of service attacks. And I don't, although it's a convenient way to do it, want to argue that Bill Jones is starting from a political point of view and working back to the technological reasons he gives. As for anonymity, it's perfectly possible to program the system so that the ballot coming in is authenticated without being read, and essentially passed on to a second server that says, this is a valid ballot, and signed again after all of the identifying information is stripped off. And it goes to a second server, and it's recognized as a valid ballot, but it doesn't know where it comes from. As for the possibility that someone can get in and read all of the records of all the transactions and correlate and figure out whose ballot that one was, I wouldn't say it's impossible. But a system that's designed to prevent it and that is programmed to preserve the anonymity from the beginning is the best that can be done about that. So I've never been able to see a way that's as good as taking a piece of paper and throwing it into a bin and then shuffling it compared to doing it digitally. But
those are coded bit numbers.
Are they? Well,
Yeah.
well then. Oh, I didn't notice that. Well, then in that case, the argument arises. Well, better than what then? So.
I have a couple of questions along that line also, and actually, I'm very curious, particularly with Arizona.
Right.
What their precise process was. Did they require? Because a lot of the discussion is with registration requiring, a normal signature registration where you actually physically register your digital signature. What did they use?
Pins were used, not digital certificates. The Democratic Party mailed each voter, or tried to mail each voter. Some voters claim they never got them and probably didn't. A pin, a one-time pin number.
How many did you?
I don't know. I think it was 4, but that's not enough for 35,000 people. No. So I don't know how long the pin number was. But it was done with pins, not permanent digital certificates.
And okay, well, interesting. And did they only had that one day
No.
though?
It went from March 7th to March 10th.
Okay. Then what? So
Which is another factor. To get back to this,
Exactly.
if the system is compromised with a denial of service attack, I mean, maybe it'll be compromised for 4 days. But given that internet elections so far, that one took 3 days, and it's up to the discretion of the people writing the law to say how long it could take. If it's over 4 days, if it takes 4 days and someone crashes it on the first day, then presumably the people running it will be able to figure out how to reset it. Although,
There'd be a lot more servers than one, so
and a lot of redundancy.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the DOS attacks still. There's not a lot you can do to prevent them. You can handle them once you've got one, but it's tricky. So that follows up on my second question. So how did they handle the browser people that had problems? I mean, what did they?
They had a hotline in Texas, and people called them up and complained, and they didn't vote.
Okay, that's what I'm going to say. So there were a number of people that literally could not vote.
Right.
That problem because either they waited to the last day.
It was mainly people. I mean, the two main things that kept people who wanted to vote from voting on the internet were people who didn't get their PIN numbers, and people whose browsers weren't advanced enough, and people who had Macintosh computers.
Huh. And so that was it. They just lost their vote.
They just didn't. Yeah. I guess they didn't get to vote.
No way to. Okay.
Well, they could have. I'm not sure about some of the details. They could have gone down to their old to some of the physical polling places and then said, we couldn't vote and vote.
Well, yeah.
So it wasn't a situation where you voted on the internet or you didn't vote, or voted from home or didn't vote. You could go to electronic polling places which also had non-electronic options. So everyone had everyone who wanted to vote could vote even if they didn't have a computer and even if they didn't want to vote on a computer.
The idea would be to encourage everyone
Right.
to vote early in case they had a problem.
Right, vote early in case there's a problem. Also, all of the bills all of the initiatives that I've written, both the Virtual Voting Rights Initiative in '96 and the California Internet Voting Initiative in '99, 2000, said existing systems are kept in place. And if you hate computers and you want to stand in line at the polls, although presumably there'd be fewer lines to stand in if everyone was voting on the computer, you'd still be able to do it. And I imagine that sometime in the same, people still stores still take cash. And they still take checks, although they prefer credit cards. Presumably, at some point in the future, when computing access is as ubiquitous as telephone access, someone will be the last person to vote with paper. Presumably, if depending on whether democracy.
Okay, so if the Democrats assigned their own party members
Right.
a pin, how did the government still? Then they gave the pins to the government.
Well, Arizona was a particular.
Server.
Arizona was a particular historical case. The Republican-controlled legislature in Arizona voted to move the primary up. And they voted to move it up, the state-sponsored, sanctioned, conducted primary. They moved that up before the New Hampshire. And the Democratic National Committee said, no voting before in New Hampshire, or we don't count it. So the Democratic Party in Arizona was in a little bind. If they let the government run their election for them, then it wouldn't count for the Democratic Party. So they had to run it themselves. So they hired a private company, and the private company ran it for them.
And then, I guess I don't
So
know.
the state really didn't come into it. I guess they didn't. I mean, I don't know how much they did.
What is it?
Perfect, you're voting for the party.
And the only election,
Yes, no.
and the only thing up the only thing up for vote was, do you prefer Bradley or Gore? So it wasn't like they were voting,
So it didn't much matter.
except within the Democratic Party. Even in the Democratic Party, it didn't matter. Gore had already swept the election before that, pretty much.
Yeah, I was just, it seems odd that the state. But
Yeah, the state was at the
it
state.
makes sense. It didn't-
Right, the state was out of the picture. What I'm trying to do with this California Identification and Petitioning Initiative is to put the state in the digital signature business, more or less.
I don't think I like
What
Well-
authority is, and what you're trying to get to do that?
Well, the bill, which email me, I'll send you a copy of, sets up a new issuing authority, the IA, and people from the DMV and the IT department and the Secretary of State's office, presumably the Attorney General's office, I guess, would sit around and figure out how to create this authority. After I looked around and found digital certificates as the solution, I thought, to remote authentication, then I tried to figure out who's going to do it. How can it be done? Are the notary publics going to do it? Are we going to set something up in the library, the post office? And then I realized there's a place where everybody goes, has their picture taken, has their thumbprint taken, gives all their vital information, gives it to the state, and the state gives them a card. It's the Department of Motor Vehicles.
There's a problem with that.
Well, I'm sure.
And the problem is this, and we checked on it, though, a few years back. We called the registrar of voters here in LA County and asked them, how did they verify citizenship by cards issued by the DMV? And the response was, we don't. It's perjury if they sign and are not legal to sign. But nobody checks.
Yeah, that's been that way.
Okay?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's an interesting fact, but that doesn't really impact this.
Exactly. I don't think it affects what he's saying.
No.
Because there is no check now, so there won't be a check. I mean, in
We
other
already
words,
have voter.
yeah.
But that's,
Ellen?
But
What?
that,
Yeah.
but that problem, that's a different problem that you have, not the technical problem, not what he's trying to do.
but I think it needs to be addressed at the same time.
Oh, sure. Well, if it's okay with the people affected, I'm happy to have them check with the FBI, INS, Department of Justice, anybody to find out if people are citizens. If you're registering to vote, there's like two levels here: what's illegal and what happens, right?
Well, also felons aren't supposed to vote.
Felons aren't supposed to vote, and that ought to be checked. And
No one
that,
ever checks that I know of.
okay, right, and
But
that.
now, but let me, I'm very curious,
Okay.
what would be, you obviously thought this part out, but what would be the problem with people registering their own digital signatures that they got from
No problem.
the state or any private company?
No, absolutely none.
I don't like the idea that the state is signing the
If
answers.
people-
There's more numbers than there are.
If the number of people who have digital certificates now, like 2% of the people, if they want to double and have 4% of the people want to have, and it seems likely that RSA or VeriSign or Entrust or GTE Cybertrust, all those guys, well, that the state is going to do contracts with them. And on the subject of the cards, I about 2 years ago, I talked this over about putting the driver's license on a smart card. Smart cards is another technology that hasn't really taken off because of the chicken and egg problem. People don't give people smart cards; they don't use them because the merchants don't have them, and so there's no market for either of them. But if the government issued 10 million digital certificates on 10 million smart cards, then there would be a reason for merchants or other people to have smart card readers, or for keyboard makers to put smart card readers in, and so on. So, but as for whether it's going to be public or private, the bill as I wrote it, the initiative as I wrote it, is neutral on that. It says if the government wants to get into that business, it could. If it wants to outsource the issuing of, which is much more likely, it seems to me, and would meet all of your requirements. I mean, the DoD doesn't build jet airplanes, right? I mean, they hire Lockheed to do it. For this issuing authority, it would simply contract with either a consortium, maybe spread it around, and then they would do that.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure why the state even.
But a private.
In other words, I changed my own software and I registered and all they do is my number.
Well, But this is a public service, so that people can vote over the internet. The government is providing a public service by providing, just as they provide a driver's license. Well, they require you to have a driver's license, but it's also a service because it's useful.
So they could give it if you wanted, but I could also take my own private one if they had nothing.
You can have both. If you want to have one, if you go to a restaurant and they only let you in if you have a digital certificate from VeriSign, you can get a VeriSign digital certificate. You can use that. This does not exclude people or companies from getting digital certificates from anybody else. It just says any more than giving a tax refund prohibits you from getting money from anybody else, right? This simply says that the state will make sure that everyone has on their driver's license. See, I checked. I talked to people at DMV in lower levels a few years ago and said, could we do this? They said, yeah, well, look into it. But I talked to the higher levels. They said, we get these cards from Polaroid. It would be prohibitively expensive to make them smart cards. I called Polaroid, and they said, for $1.78, we can make it a smart card. $1.78 incremental cost more. We can make it a smart card. You'd hardly be able to tell the difference, except there'd be those 6 little contacts on it.
The phrase you used that worried me was the state would make sure that you have a number.
Well, we could, if you want, talk about the general mythological and psychological and historical aspects that the state will make sure you have a number. The state already makes sure we have many numbers, it seems to me. The banks make sure we have numbers.
And register my own digital.
You can't.
I don't want them to assign it. I don't want them to contract.
Well, the VeriSign. Is it okay with you, a VeriSign?
I feel very comfortable with RSA.
Okay.
VeriSign. I feel very comfortable purchasing certificates from them. And I would personally register mine.
You see, the problem with that is how
I don't want them signing and making sure that everyone has. If it's a voluntary.
Well, they want everyone to be able to vote. Everyone has a Social Security number, don't they?
Yeah, well, that doesn't mean I like that.
Well, all right. So you're not going to dislike this anymore.
I did that.
You
did it to me.
Well,
That's
the
right.
whole
Well.
process is a voluntary process, if that's what you want to do.
That's what I'm saying. But as long as it's voluntary, because he.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Sure
Oh, I'm sorry.
everyone
If you don't want a smart card digital certificate, and you don't want to vote online, and you don't want to use it for anything else, you don't have to have it. Fine, no problem. We won't force you to have a smart card.
That's.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you were.
Yeah,
But if you want one, you can have one.
Voluntary and
Voluntary.
consensual, and there isn't
Sure.
some type of
Coercion. Well, coercion. No
state
coercion.
enforcing
I don't want any coercion by the state or anybody.
that part. Now, what costs are you talking about with this thing?
Well, right, incremental costs.
Like what?
I can't imagine it would cost more than $5 more per card per citizen. That's only $150 million, isn't it?
Oh, gee. That's all.
Would it be the governor's budget? That's nothing.
That is nothing compared to the government's
That
budget.
argument never went over me. Every
But is
penny
that
comes out of a
is that
taxpayer
added to the cost of conducting an election now?
Oh, no. In terms of the cost of conducting an election, it seems to me is going to go way, way down.
Right.
This is the incremental cost for giving, that I was talking about, was giving people a smart card with a digital certificate as their driver's license. That's what the incremental $5 for is. The cost of conducting elections goes way down,
Right.
it seems to me. You buy the software, you put the software in, you do it. Everyone's got their certificate now. You can have elections more often if you want. You can have a special election. It's easy.
Recalls.
Recalls all the time if you want.
Just kidding.
You know, I read I forget where it was, that the insurance commissioner right now in the state of California is authorized to give digital signatures.
The insurance commissioner?
Recalls?
Yeah.
For what? For what
The
purpose?
insurance code. I have no idea.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll give him a buzz and see if he wants to dig his way out of his current situation by becoming the champion of digital certificates.
Mark,
Yes.
do you have any numbers on any increase in the participation in the primaries in Arizona?
Well, yes, although it's a little biased. In '96, Bill Clinton was running unopposed in the Democratic primary, and about 5,000 or 6,000 people voted. And this time, 35,000 people voted. So it was like an increase of like 6 times, 600%. But again, there was no competition then, and there was no hullabaloo as there was this time.
Has that been broken down to party and people?
There was no party. It was all Democrats. All Democrats. I haven't seen the statistic that said how minorities are.
Right, or
Right.
economic status.
No, I haven't.
The argument about the digital divide.
I understand. I haven't seen it.
How accessible was it to people without?
I'm as curious as you are.
Wait a minute, it's in library. Actually, shoot, I just lost another question.
Okay.
Okay, now, the Shelley's bill.
Right, Shelley's bill. I'll get Shelley's bill for you.
Committee, I'm assuming, so.
I think it's in some committee. Let me get you Shelley's bill here.
And how is that, and how, maybe this is a segue to what you're doing, is it, I assume, I don't remember any part of the Millennium Digital Copyright Act, that was solely about e-commerce. We wouldn't have codified anything for any type of voting registration, right? Okay. Okay.
Do you ever think of using the post office to issue your digital IDs?
Yeah, but have you ever gone to the post office?
Recently, it's been nice.
Is it pretty nice
They've
recently?
been a lot better lately.
Which, you don't go to that one in Apollo, do you?
No.
I was gonna say, I know where your office is.
I'm flexible.
I've been
I mean, if the post, you know, that would make it easier to do it all over the country eventually, right? If the post office got into it, but you'd have to get the. I mean, they're a federal.
Or we can do it when you sign up for selective service.
Chandler, and it's a cool
Well,
building, but it's-
you can make it part of when you signed up for selective service. It might make it a little more attractive at the margins.
But you have to,
You do have to
if you're a man.
if you're a man.
If you're a man.
Well, then we can require women to sign up for it.
You could, but that's another issue. That's another issue.
Only
In
men will vote
France,
now.
they have, post office does a lot of banking.
If only men have to register.
Don't get her started.
What? I'm sorry.
She blinked for a second and we
The
changed
post office does a lot of services, like,
It was Scott's
if you
who
travel,
said that.
that's where you cash your traveler's checks at the French post office.
Really? Okay.
Rather than at the bank.
Yeah.
It's a weird system, but that's how they do it.
Okay, so.
Here's Kevin.
What is
Here's
Shelley's-
Shelley's bill. It's called number 2519, and it says express the intent of the legislature to require the Secretary of State to implement a pilot program to register people to vote and vote on the internet. The bill would also declare the intent of the legislature to require the Secretary of State, upon recommendation of the California Internet Voting Technical Review Committee, to adopt rules and regulations for a county that elects to participate in the pilot program. And there's going to be a committee, the technical review, two members of this. He needs three counties to participate, and before the 1st of July 2001, the Secretary of State would have to adopt rules to guide the conduct of these elections, and people could now vote in these pilot programs according on the internet, notwithstanding any other terms of state law. And it couldn't include any federal or state candidate or state ballot measure. So I don't know what they're going to have left. I guess they're going to have county supervisors,
So you have to do it separately?
Local.
Go and-
local offices,
Yeah, and that
local
makes
offices.
sense in that timeline because in 2001, the only elections that.
Or that, anyway, right, exactly. So
Local.
that's useful, right. Right, okay.
Okay, is
So
that, do you know where that is in committee or?
I don't. It says here, no. But you can go to you go to leginfo.ca.gov.
And is there, nationwide, which state is most progressed in this besides the Arizona
This is-
test pilot? Isn't
Well,
that-
I pretty much covered.
Alaska?
What? Well, Alaska conducted a vote out in the bush in the Republican primary, and 6 or 7 people voted. And several of them were in the senator's office in Washington, D.C. And it changed the outcome, and whoever lost complained.
Really?
Yes.
I
So,
love stories.
but I don't think things are moving. There's a bill in New York State, I think.
Oh, that's.
There's a bill in New York State. There's the bill I just mentioned in Pennsylvania that says vote at the poll. You can vote at the polls on the internet, which has the cost-saving elements and has more security, presumably, but it doesn't get the convenience for the voters. There's this one, 2519, and I'm not sure where it. I called the staffer who's monitoring it, or who wrote it, as far as I know, a few hours before I came to see what was up, but I couldn't. He was busy, so I don't know. So that's what's happening with that. There's a lot of stuff going on with digital signatures at the federal level.
Yeah, that bill's
And-
stuck in conference.
Is it? Because that it would almost pass, and then people were worried about privacy, I think, or
Well,
something,
two
or forcing people to use it. So.
The Senate version and the House
Oh,
version passed,
yeah.
didn't they? I think, Senate and House. And then now everything's stuck in.
In any case, this would be a good way for California to get back to the front of doing so. Utah has been doing a lot of stuff with digital certificates, and may eventually get around to voting that way. But I have to say, there isn't at the present a rising tide of a lot of legislation, or as far as I know, any initiatives anywhere to do internet voting in the country. That's one of the reasons why this new one I'm working on doesn't legalize internet voting. It legalizes. It says everyone gets a signature who wants a digital certificate who wants one, and digital certificates can be used to sign initiative petitions, which presumably could be used to sign a petition to do an initiative to legalize internet voting. But it doesn't say internet voting, and it says that you can use these for internet voting if and when internet voting begins. And a lot of others, it says in some detail place for a lot of other things. But it doesn't legalize internet voting. It legalizes. One real advantage, I think, of that, from a sort of tactical point of view, is the stuff you were raising about anonymity. you're sort of publicly saying something when you sign an initiative petition. Your anonymity, although, as far as I understand, also those, you can't find those names out very easily for privacy reasons and all kinds of reasons. They're sort of semi-public, I think, but they are sort of public. I mean,
You can get
the people who signed it before you did, if you're standing out in front of the store, you know their names if you look at it. But so the issue of being anonymous doesn't really come in to petition signing, because you're saying I
Well, yeah,
favor
there
putting
you're
something out.
talking about a digital signature, and you don't have to worry about encrypting the information.
No, you really don't have to encrypt anything, right?
Okay, well then I'm
And in
gonna-
fact, just as a small technical note, the Adobe Acrobat system, the PDF system, is already ready to go to digitally sign stuff. So that if you're in an office and you want your boss to sign it or your colleagues or something, you post it, they sign it, it says who signed it and different levels of security. So there's no need for any technology, there's no need for any big expense or anything like that. It's just
As far as you know, then this has to be done state by state, or is there any?
voting is a state deal.
But
Voting, the Constitution says the states figure out how to vote for
would there
this.
be a way then for people to vote if they were out of state?
Oh, absolutely. Out of state, out of mind, out of the country, out of the off-planet, wherever they have internet access.
Just access.
Right. The federal, there's an often repeated, there's a program that the federal government it's called the Federal Voter Assistance Program. The Pentagon, in every article about internet voting includes one paragraph, the same paragraph, about this program, Federal Voter Assistance Program. In fact, it's the Pentagon's effort to let 200 people in the armed services vote in 3 or 4 counties, one in Utah, in the November 2000 election. Strangely enough, the Belgian initiative, the Belgian law here that I have, says that if that one works, then the government, as it refers to it, not knowing how complicated it is, will let everybody who's overseas, all Americans overseas, vote on the internet. So I'm going to call the Belgians and find out about that. I don't think that's right, but they're hopeful. And some stuff. There are people in Australia. There are people, like I said, in Belgium. There are different places where this is coming up as an issue, but it's not ready yet. So that's why the Valley ought to be able to. And there isn't any reason if the Valley turns out that it secedes by itself without using the internet, there's no reason why it couldn't adopt the internet for its elections or for its petitioning purposes once it's government, and it'd be a little less than I outlined, but it would still be something. So, if there's no more, please
that's just
take
it
my
for the
thanks.
moment. We always think of questions later and bother people and email them. And for those of you who don't recall, we did take a position more than 2 years ago on supporting internet voting. So we do have a generic
Well, thank you.
position on that. So as these bills come along, if we have all kinds of extra time,
I can give you.
to try to see if they fall within the realm of the previous position we've taken. So it's a very generic internet voting bill.
Right.
It doesn't, I don't recall saying anything about
The one last
state
year,
assignment of numbers. But,
the one we did last year does allow for the signature.
Voluntary. That's now the voluntary assignment.
the digital signature one, the separate position we took, yeah, okay.
How does one get a hold of you? You said
One sends email to my email, which is Etopia, ETOPIA, at pacificnet.net.
I want to thank you very much, and as all guests we make aware, you're more than welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting. Most people don't care and want to leave, but...
I'll unpack my equipment. Thank you all for listening so attentively and intelligently to everything I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good update. Okay, as far as the next